Thank you for joining us and welcome to the next in our line of ESHA research webinars. Today's webinar is going to go over taking a closer look at the new FDA dietary fiber definition and how that's going to affect you and how you can handle that within the Genesis application. A little bit about ESHA research. ESHA was established in 1981 with the goal of providing a comprehensive nutrition database with few missing values. Currently, our solutions have a food formulation and labeling software. The Genesis Food application also has restaurant menu analysis and labeling. We have a brand new Genesis supplements application that's available. We have the food processor that allows you to analyze diets and nutrition. Then we have our consulting services for label creation. Today you will hear myself. My name is Benjamin Miller, and with me is Maya, and she'll go through the majority of our webinar today. A little bit about Genesis. Genesis was released in 1991, and that's what we're going to look at today. Currently, we have both the pre and post 2016 label formats, as well as Canada, Europe, and Mexico. We have menu analysis, nutrient searching, reporting features, and audit trails. And we have labeling compliance along with allergen and ingredient statements and nutrient content claims. We have a few upcoming webinars past today. We have an overview of Canada's new nutrition facts regulations. That'll be on March 28th. We have a 45-minute webinar looking at the Genesis version 11.3, which should be released very soon, which will introduce the new Health Canada label formats into Genesis. We have restaurant menu labeling regulations and best practices on April 4th. We're going to have a import supplier ingredients with the new version of ESHA port on May 16th. That's going to go over all of the new functions and features that are going along with ESHA port version 4.3. And then on May 30th, we have the buzz on the FDA's definition of added sugars. Now we're going to go ahead and go over to my colleague Maya, who is going to go through all of the changes for fiber and take a look inside of the Genesis program.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is Maya. As my friend Ben has introduced me, I will be guiding you through this exploration of dietary fiber today. What better day than Valentine's Day to talk about dietary fiber? Our agenda today will be heavily focused on educating and reminding ourselves of the new FDA definition for dietary fiber. We'll also explore what a citizen's petition is in regards to dietary fiber, as well as focus on how Genesis R&D has been developed to account for these changes. This will be recorded and provided to you in an email after the webinar. The timeline for compliance, as always, we'd like to give a reminder. For those companies that make more than $10 million in annual food sales, you will have until July 26, 2018 to make the transition for all of your products. For those companies making less than $10 million in annual food sales, you will have 3 years, so July 26, 2019. People are certainly already getting moving on this process. Also in Genesis, for those of you that are our customers and those that are not, we will have both the old and the new formats available excuse me, in Genesis throughout the remainder of the transition period. So you can feel safe that if certain customers want to still work in the old label or certain customers are ready to move forward, you'll be able to provide that solution to each of those folks. So let's dive into the definition here. So previously, per the 1990 regulations, as we kind of refer to them in ESHA, there was no written definition for dietary fiber. So that really changed as per the new regulations that came out in 2016. The main difference we have now is that the new definition focuses on non-digestible carbohydrates that demonstrate physiological effects beneficial to human health. This can occur in two ways. One being from whole foods where the non-digestible carbohydrates are intrinsic and intact, i.e. the fiber is still intact in these foods. The second way this can occur would be through isolated or synthetic fibers that demonstrate this stated physiological effect beneficial to human health. Examples of this sort of physiological effect would be lowering blood pressure, lowering blood glucose levels, and others that we will explore later. So let's break down a bit deeper to understand the differences between the natural and isolated synthetic groups of fibers. The whole foods that fall into the natural category are in essence unaffected by the new rule. So these types of whole foods that, like I said, have the fiber intact and intrinsic, they are essentially unaffected by the new rule. They maintain their dietary fiber ruling because they are intrinsically beneficial to our bodies. This also includes foods that have gone through a mechanical process such as milling, in which the nutrients found in the food in its whole state, such as vitamins and minerals, are retained during the process. So if the food has been put through a mechanical process but still maintains the type of nutrients that we would find in its whole state, we can then also determine that that is a beneficial natural form of the fiber. Secondly, in order for the isolated and synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates to count as dietary fiber on the new label, they must of course demonstrate that same physiological effect we've been talking about. They can either be on the approved list, which has been established thus far, or if proper studies and results exist, manufacturers can petition to add additional isolated or synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates to the list. Here are some examples of items in each of those categories. So this is the list of the 7 approved isolated and synthetic fibers as we stand today. We've talked about naturally occurring fibers. So here we've got whole grains, beans, berries, nuts and seeds, things where the whole food really contains that intrinsic and intact fiber. Then we have some examples of naturally occurring fiber that goes through this mechanical type of process. So cereal bran, cocoa powder, vegetable protein extracts, and purees. Although these are processed to some extent, they still maintain nutrients enough to be counted as dietary fiber on the new label. This slide lists the types of non-digestible carbohydrates that were under review in addition to the 7 that were initially determined to be beneficial. The FDA sought comments from industry in regards to this list. Comments could include information on such things if additional studies exist but were not considered by the FDA's review, as well as if there were other relevant physiological effects that were also not considered by the review. This period ended yesterday, February 13th, so we await final decision on these additional categories under review, and we will certainly provide that information as soon as we get it. There's also been a change in the RDI recommended daily intake values for dietary fiber. So it's been increased from 25 grams to 28 grams. It's still considered part of the total carbohydrate value, and the total carbohydrate RDI value has been decreased from 300 to 275. So the goal here is, as we all hear kind of throughout our daily lives these days, we need to eat more beneficial carbohydrates in our diet. As per the new regulations, there are now 6 acceptable ways to calculate calories for the Nutrition Facts Panel. By default, Genesis R&D, our program, takes the caloric value of each individual ingredient and adds these numbers together. The result is the total calorie value. One of the other ways to calculate calories, which would be done outside of Genesis, is the 449 method, in which the non-digestible carbohydrate and sugar alcohols are subtracted from the total carbohydrate value prior to going through the 449 process. So in this case, insoluble non-digestible carbs contribute 0 kcals, and soluble non-digestible carbohydrates contribute 2 kcals per gram. Again, this is something that would be done outside of Genesis, but is an acceptable way to calculate calories. Genesis can, however, calculate calories via 449, but will not take into account insoluble versus soluble non-digestible carbs. And this is, again, another acceptable way to calculate calories. So what does this really mean? Here's a great graphic that shows basically the same product going through a previous calculation versus the new calculation. So up here we have a product that is providing 5 grams of soluble fiber from oats, 10 grams of insoluble fiber, which is coming from inulin and cellulose. As per the old regulations, we didn't really have to go through this sort of educational process. So whatever was determined to be dietary fiber, that's what we ran with on our label. So we would have 15 grams of total dietary fiber, which would take into account the oats, the inulin, and the cellulose, all as dietary fiber on the label. Now, when we look at how this calculation would be considered per the new regulations, we're still getting 5 grams of beneficial soluble fiber from the oats. We're also getting the 5 grams of insoluble fiber from the cellulose. However, inulin has been determined that it is not beneficial, and it is on the list of review that the FDA is reviewing. So in this case, because we are not told that inulin makes the list, we are not allowed to consider it beneficial, in which case our new total dietary fiber will be 10 grams rather than the 15, and we have to subtract the inulin as that's not considered beneficial. Implications for the label. So in the previous slide, we had an example showing where not all the dietary fiber was considered beneficial. Here we have a scenario where everything would be considered beneficial, but as you can see, because of the change in RDI values from 25 to 28, this creates a difference in percent DV values. So we've got the old label here is showing at 16%, where with the new fiber RDI values, we're showing at 14% daily value. Now, although this wouldn't necessarily make us change a claim, you can see how a simple change in a couple percentage points could really make or break your nutrient content claim. So if we were looking at a product that was 9 versus 11%, we would no longer be able to make a good source of fiber claim. So just a reminder that this may impact your label. It's something to consider when you're thinking through how to approach dietary fiber. Certainly take a glance at all of your daily values and understand if anything has been affected where claims would need to be reevaluated. We'll also talk later about using the spreadsheet report in Genesis to understand if we're missing any information. So it's a very good tool to understand that. Get in the habit of looking deeply at your ingredient statements. Start to look for trigger ingredients that make you think deeper about how to classify them in terms of dietary fiber. Remember that there are many ways to skin a cat, so in some cases the same ingredient could have different ways of it being represented. It could, two different suppliers could name the same ingredient in different ways. Also, if there are ingredients that make you question or need to learn more, ingredients that make you go, I don't know about that one. That's always good to go through that process because the more you go, the more you might reach out for more information from your suppliers, perhaps learn more from what's provided by the FDA currently or reach out for more information from them. So it's really good practice to scour your ingredient statements so that you can reach out for more information if you need it. Here's an example of kind of going through that process of looking at an ingredient statement. I would suggest getting out a highlighter and highlighting ingredients that are, again, trigger ingredients, things that make you kind of take a step back and think for a second. In this case, we're showing an ingredient statement which has listed gum arabic. Gum arabic is also known as acacia gum, which is on the list up for review. Similarly, we have chicory root listed, which is another name for inulin, also in that same category, which is also up for review. So be aware and also educate yourselves of the types of ingredients that might have multiple ways to name them. All right, so citizens petition. We talked a little bit about about this, but what is it? So manufacturers can submit a citizen petition either electronically or via the snail mail to the FDA, and the goal here would be if they are hoping to add additional non-digestible carbohydrates to the approved list. There are specific items a citizen's petition must hit on, and these include what action is being requested, the statement of grounds for the petition, any environmental impact, economic impact, as well as certification. So these 5 pieces must be included in any citizen's petition. Of course, in order for a non-digestible carbohydrate to be added to the approved list, there must be ample research to make your case. Let's talk a little bit more about what should be included and maybe what would be expected to be included in a statement of grounds. We would want to provide all appropriate studies, so whether they were proved your point or didn't. We want to provide every single study we could find on the subject that we're exploring. Also, there are certain scientific parameters that must be followed in the research. So are the studies being operated on healthy populations and populations that are representative of the United States? Also, things that they would determine are what was the length of the study and how many studies were evaluated and what number would be sufficient. So those are just a few of the parameters that the FDA would expect you to follow when providing your statement of grounds. Also, very importantly, obviously we would want to prove positive effects. So these physiological benefits for the human health, things like lowering blood glucose, lowering blood cholesterol, lowering blood pressure, increased mineral absorption. These are all and there are additional things that can contribute to that as well. But basically, you're going to have a lot of studies. You're going to have a really thorough way that those studies were performed, and then some pretty provable results in order to add your non-digestible carbohydrate to the approved list. And I know a lot of people out there, a lot of manufacturers have already sort of started this process, so good for you. Keep supporting your products and shooting for what you believe in. Lastly, documentation is important, of course, and we mentioned this during most of our webinars because, again, we cannot decipher between naturally occurring and beneficial fiber or the isolated and synthetic fiber. We must kind of document exactly what's going on in our products. So if we have a combination of fibers that are non-digestible carbohydrates that would not count towards the definition mixed with other foods that are contributing some beneficial dietary fiber, we need to document that information. Electronic databases are a reasonable way to do this, as well as formulation and batch sheets, and all documents will be required to be kept for 2 years after the food has been introduced into the market. At this point, we're going to transition into how Genesis handles the new dietary fiber definition and discuss things to be mindful of and aware of when transitioning from the old to the new label, especially when using Genesis. So a little bit of a quick reminder here. We used to have just 3 fields. Those were dietary fiber, soluble fiber, and insoluble fiber. Those have been renamed to include the total dietary fiber, total soluble fiber, and total insoluble fiber. These fields here still are in essence connected to the old definition, or when there was no definition. So these total dietary fiber fields will pull forward to the old label. And then we've added 6 more fiber fields. So we've got dietary fiber 2016, along with soluble and insoluble 2016. These 3 here will pull forward to the new label, and in order to populate them in Genesis, it must meet that definition that we've been discussing today. We've also provided 3 fields for documentation purposes. So if in fact you'd like to document if you have other fibers or other non-digestible carbohydrates in your product, or perhaps that you have 0, you can certainly use those fields to do either of those. This is what it looks like in Genesis. So the yellow field at the top will be the old fields, as you can see, pulling toward the old 1990 labels. And the additional 6 items here will be the top 3 dietary fiber 2016, which is the mandatory, will pull forward to the new label. Soluble fiber 2016 and insoluble 2016 are not mandatory, and they were always voluntary. So that same holds true for the old and the new label. However, those would need to be populated here if you want that to show up voluntarily on your new label. If you happen to not be seeing the new fiber fields, remember that Show All Nutrients needs to be highlighted. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to just show you another graphic here, which reminds you that if you're think about it this way, if you're working in the old label, all the fiber would be populated into the total dietary fiber fields. If you're working in the new label and you're working with a naturally occurring fiber, we can go ahead and enter that into dietary fiber 2016. again, if you're working in the new label and working with an added beneficial fiber, something that's listed, guar gum, pectin, cellulose, we would also populate that into Dietary Fiber 2016. And again, lastly, if you're working in the new label and working with something that is not approved or not on the approved list, such as inulin, we would want to go ahead and enter that information into the other fiber fields in Genesis. So I'm going to hop over to Genesis, which is our program. So what you're viewing now is I basically have a recipe open. At this point, it's a strawberry scone. So let's kind of work through how we might handle these things in Genesis. So let's go ahead and view our label. Once we do that, we see we are viewing the old label. It's the old nutrition fact panel. Everything looks fine and dandy to me. I'm not missing any values, and things look pretty on a good start. Let's say I'm ready to make the transition over to the new label. I can go back to Edit Label. In the category area, I will choose Nutrition Facts with nothing after it. That is going to now produce the new label. What you'll see now is I might see some different values. One thing I know is that I do have a very glaringly missing value, which is added sugar. And I do recall, I think I had 3 grams of dietary fiber showing on that old label. If I want to go ahead and check back, it's pretty simple. Just go back to Edit Label, go back to the category and change it to 1990. And I do in fact see that I am showing 3 grams of dietary fiber. However, when I go to my new label, I'm showing a 0. So why could that be, and how can you help yourself so that you get the correct information on the label? Well, a very important and useful tool is the spreadsheet report. So up at the top toolbar, we go to Reports, and we're going to hit on the spreadsheet report. What I'm viewing now is the nutrient list that is based off of the new 2016 nutrients. Anywhere there is a red line, I see that I'm actually missing information. I'm missing added sugar for every single ingredient, which is why I'm seeing that dashed line on my actual label, but you can see I'm missing 2 instances for Dietary Fiber 2016. So the label is showing me a 0. So if I hadn't gone to the spreadsheet report, how would I really know what information I was missing? Once I get here, I can figure out, okay, I need to update the almond flour as well as the sugar. These are user added ingredients. Remember, if you use ESHA ingredients, something like a sugar will already be populated with added sugar. So this is definitely the scenario where you have already pre-entered your ingredients and you're sort of going through to make the transition to the new label. The best practice is to go into these individual ingredients and open them up and populate the dietary fiber. For the focus of today, I'm not going to focus on the added sugar. Obviously, that would be something we would definitely need to investigate further. However, let's focus solely on the dietary fiber for today. So I'll go back to my recipe screen and I'm going to open up that sugar. Excuse me, I'm going to start with the almond flour. So I right click and open item. Then I can go to the nutrients screen here to see what I'm working with. I see right off the bat that I do have total dietary fiber information listed, but I am actually missing Dietary Fiber 2016. Now this is an almond flour. I know that there is no other types of dietary fiber going on here, so I might choose to use the auto calculator. We did a webinar on the auto calculator last week, so please visit our website if you'd like to view that. I could go ahead and turn on my auto calculations, choose the calculate nutrients, and then from this screen I'm going to choose to calculate Dietary Fiber Beneficial 2016. Once I do that, because this was already populated with a 0, other Dietary Fiber 2016 is a 0, my Dietary Fiber 2016 will match my total dietary fiber. So I've updated that ingredient, I can save it, and I can go right back to my spreadsheet report and see that I now have a value there. Lastly, I need to go into this sugar. Now that should be a simple one because sugar should not have any fiber at all. So as I open this item, I can go to my nutrients page, I notice that it is populated for the initial old fields, and I can just populate the same way here, knowing that if there's 0 grams of total dietary fiber, there's going to be 0 grams of dietary fiber 2016. And I'm going to turn off my auto calculations because I just prefer to do this quickly by hand. Once I've updated that ingredient, I can save it and again go back to my spreadsheet report. Now you see that I have all my values filled out for dietary fiber. Let's see how it updated the label. The label now is showing 3 grams of dietary fiber, which we expect to see, knowing that all the fiber in this scone is considered beneficial, whether it is naturally occurring or isolated. Just a reminder that the spreadsheet report, you can choose what you'd like to view here. So we can go into the nutrients to view, which would be the at the home page here, nutrients to view. This will be a different set of lists that you can choose to view. So if I'd like to see what US label mandatory would be, this would be as per the old regulations. You can see I'm not missing any information on this, these nutrients. Again, just very simple to switch it back to US label 2016 mandatory to see that we are in fact missing. At this point, I am going to head back over to our PowerPoint and have Ben take it away.
Thank you, Maya. That was fantastic. So if anyone is as confused as I am about the new regulations, we do have some upcoming general trainings available. On March 23rd and 24th, we'll have a professional training for Genesis in Washington, D.C. On March 27th and 28th, we'll have a professional training for restaurants specifically in Illinois. And then we'll have an advanced Genesis workshop April 25th and 26th in Washington, D.C., going over advanced details of Genesis. And then we'll have a professional training for Genesis in Toronto, Ontario, and that's going to go over specifically the Canadian regulations. The new Canadian regulations will be very specific to Canada. And now we'll go ahead and go through some of the questions that we have got here. Next slide. As always, if you would like to contact us, you can give us a call at the phone number or email our sales line or our support line. We also have a few helpful resources. You can go to our LinkedIn page, take a look at our blog on our website, or go to our or view our e-newsletter. This webinar is recorded, I think as Maya had mentioned before. We will email that out along with the slides today, so you will get a copy of all of that right afterwards today. We'll go into a few questions that we've got from some of the people that had some questions about what's going on today. First question here, is dietary fiber used to calculate total carbohydrates? I'll let Maya take the answers for all these questions.
So dietary fiber is part of the total carbohydrate. So when you look at your spec sheet and you see whatever your supplier is giving you for total carbohydrate, that will include any dietary fiber that should be included, as well as sugars and starches. And so yes, dietary fiber is part of the total carbohydrates.
Perfect. Our next question, can you show us how to calculate calories via the 449 method inside of Genesis?
Definitely. I did kind of mention that Genesis, that is one of the available options per the FDA, as well as one of the ways Genesis can do that. So the way that we do that, once you have your recipe screen open, you can go over to Edit Label. Then we're going to go to Nutrient Options. From here, I will do the drop-down menu for calories, and then you'll see that the default is the total of all calories for the calorie calculation method. I can simply change that to the 449 method, and this label alone would now be calculated based on the 449 method.
Fantastic. Our next question, why am I not seeing the new fiber fields?
Probably show all nutrients. So why don't I just go back to that slide that we have right here. So once you have Genesis open, there's a little box down on the left. Make sure that's clicked, and that should allow you to see all the fields. If it's not, you will in fact only be seeing the total dietary fiber fields.
All right, our next question. What should I do if I don't know if my ingredient counts as beneficial or not beneficial?
That's a great question. Suppose you have a couple options. One would be definitely reach out to your supplier. If you're unsure, ask questions, ask your supplier, email the FDA, and collect the information, document each time that you've asked those that you are asking, and it might be wise to just wait until you have that information really solid to go off of. I suppose a second solution could be to play it safe, and if you're working with an ingredient that is not on the recognized list of isolated or synthetic fibers and it's not considered naturally occurring, I would go ahead and play that safe and call that a non-digestible carbohydrate that would not count towards the new definition. So kind of got a couple options there, either wait and reach out or play it safe.
Great information, Maya. Our next question, if dietary fiber is 0, should I enter 0 for dietary fiber 2016, or can I enter 0 for all the fiber fields?
If dietary fiber is 0, you'd be safe to say you're not getting any soluble or insoluble fiber. So I would say yes, you could go ahead and populate all the fields with 0, knowing they have absolutely no fiber in the total, when you start out in the total field.
Great. And one last question. What if I want to see fibers for both the old and new label on my spreadsheet report?
Very handy. So I'm going to hop over to Genesis. I would use that spreadsheet report that you just mentioned, and we would arrange our nutrients to view to create a list that would have what we wanted to view. So essentially, go back to the home page. We hit on nutrients to view, and you'll notice there is at the top an area where it says modify. So I could go ahead and choose modify. At this point, if I modify this, I will be actually modifying the label 2016 mandatory list. So I may choose to start a brand new list. I can go new, and then from this list of nutrients, I simply choose the ones that I would like to highlight. So I could choose dietary fiber, the total dietary fiber, which would be per the old regulations. Perhaps you'd want to throw in total soluble and total insoluble, and then you could compare that to dietary fiber 2016, soluble 2016, and insoluble 2016. Hit OK. We might want to do a save as and name this something like fiber fields. We'll go ahead and save that list, and the list will automatically change. So now we're viewing all the old dietary fiber fields as well as the new dietary fiber fields.
As always, thank you for joining us. If we didn't get to your questions, we certainly will follow up individually. And everyone have a great day.